to the Ear Hustling Podcast, Season 3, Episode 16. Hello, everybody. I'm joined with the guys. Mine is James. How's everybody doing? Prince, how was your weekend?
Hey, it was pretty good. I'm doing well. Just a heads up for everybody. I'm kind of running things behind the scenes today. So please get your yes.
Look at the millennial doing work. Whoa!
He's earning his paycheck.
And with that, it gives me power to do things like this. So it's nice. It's real nice, and it's gonna be a better show. It's gonna be a good show this way.
It's already better.
Get your comments. I'm ready to display them.
Patrick, how are you doing? How was your weekend?
I'm doing well. It's been crazy. My little one was ill this weekend, so we kind of just hung around home and taking care of her. She's doing better. She's good. So back to school today. I had a big meeting. It was good stuff. I'm good.
Good. Your Bills had a close call on Sunday.
Listen, a win is a win is a win is a win. And we have a guy named Joshua Patrick Allen. You can also refer to him as Superman if you'd like.
Wow.
Also the most overrated quarterback ever, right? Come on.
Well, he is, but that's a topic for another show. Eric, what about you?
Hey, I'm doing great. The Lions won overtime, beat Matthew Stafford and the Rams. It was probably the best game of the week. Hey, the Tigers are actually coming on strong with a pretty decent chance of making the wild card round in MLB. So who would have thought after the way they started? Oh yeah, absolutely.
Baseball still playing?
I know.
Baseball is still playing, my friend. So let me see. The Tigers won a World Series last year. Well, it was 84.
84.
That's like, what, 40 years ago? So, yeah, I think we're about due for a good playoff run. But I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. I'm a little nervous though with Princeton driving.
Hey, we'll get there. We'll get there fast.
Student driver.
All right, Eric, I'm going to keep it with you so we can look at this day in history.
Okay, so speaking of this day in history, September 11th, there was actually a lot of other things that were going on. I just got done talking about baseball. So specifically in 1985 on September 11th, Pete Rose broke the all-time hit record that was held by Ty Cobb. So other than the obvious September 11th, that was a major event that happened back in 1985.
Wow, that's a good one.
1985, I was 1.
Prince,
how old were you?
I wasn't even a thought yet.
He was a sperm.
I might not have been.
You were just a twinkle. You were just a twinkle in an eye.
Maybe you thought, maybe if I have a baby, maybe I'll name him Princeton. So, probably leave it a passive thought. But yeah,
show off the rails already.
Yeah, exactly.
Already.
James, come back, please.
We do miss James. Hope he's enjoying his vacation with his wife.
I know. He's on vacation. Did anybody know that he was going on vacation? I mean, come on.
I'm just learning now that you brought it up. I was surprised.
So this
guy takes more vacations than anybody I know.
This episode is about remembering 9/11, 23 years later. So where I want to start, I want to get where were you during 9/11, 23 years ago? So I want to start with Patrick. What were you doing? Where were you? Did you hear the news? Did you see it live on TV? Like, just reflect on that.
So September 11th, 2001 for me, really, I mean, besides the fact that obviously everything happened with the Twin Towers and stuff, was a pretty memorable day for me anyways. So my story on September 11th started on September 10th, actually, when I was playing street football with my buddies. I was a senior in high school at the time, and I distinctly remember it because on the evening of September the 10th, I was playing street football, caught a ball, fell in the middle of the street, and broke my wrist. Didn't know it was broken at the time on September the 10th. Went to the ER September 10th, found out that it was broken, the whole thing. ended up having a casting appointment for my broken wrist on the September 11th, because so I was a senior in high school, so I was out of school. I had a 7:30 appointment to get the cast on my right hand. So I was at the emergency room that morning, whole deal, getting a cast on my hand. Came home. I should have been in school, wasn't. Came home at about a little after 9, got home and turned on the television. And within minutes, I remember physically watching the second plane hit the building. At the time, I think it was like 9:36. I think the actual time of the second plane coming in. I was a senior in high school. I mean, shit, I didn't know what was going on. I had turned on the channel. It was on every single channel. And I just remember calling my dad, calling my brother, trying to figure out what was going on. I remember where I was and what I was doing. It's just crazy to me because it's memorable for two reasons for me: for the broken wrist and for obviously being out of school when I was. But I was a senior in high school. Crazy. That's 23 years ago.
Was it your hand that you handle yourself
Well,
with?
hey, listen, I am left-handed. Okay, I am left-handed, but I have been known to be ambidextrous. Okay, so I pinch hit every once in a while. So it was a struggle for that time. It was a struggle.
Hilarious.
Sorry
Eric,
about that.
Eric, how about you?
I was getting ready for work. At the time, I was a manager at an auto parts store. I was going to work the closing shift. I was getting ready for work when we saw that. The crazy thing about that, used to from time to time jump on a bus downtown and then shoot over to the auto parts store because it was just on the outskirts of downtown. They was alerting everybody that the downtown area was closed because the fear was the Twin Towers went down and they would think that other large buildings would be a target, like the Renaissance Center, the Sears Towers over in Chicago, the Space Needle over in Seattle, etc. So they actually had the National Guards cutting off all of the entrances, and they made all of those major areas no-fly zones. So I didn't even go to work that day because of that, because it was just that crazy. Our jobs was like, you know what, just tell everybody to stay home. But yeah, I remember that, watching it intensely, like very nervously, thinking it was about to be the start of World War III. Had no idea what was going on, so it was pretty scary.
All right, thank you for sharing that. So I'll go next. So I was working the night shift the day before, um, and I came home that morning, and I was just hanging out in the living room. I was living with my brother at the time. I had just graduated college a couple months before, and so I came home. I sat in the living room and had the news on for some reason. The first plane had already hit, and I don't remember what newscaster it was. I want to say it was Channel 4 NBC in Detroit, and they had the newscaster or some specialist didn't make a big deal out of the first plane. He was like, "Oh, this happens all the time. Little small planes fly into buildings in New York," which I thought was just ridiculous. But anyway, they were downplaying the entire thing. And then the second plane hit, and I remember jumping up and screaming. My brother and sister-in-law were, I guess, in their room or maybe getting ready for their day. And I was screaming, yelling, like, "Oh, they're, plane flew into the building." It was a sight to see, not in a good way. It was shocking. I was 7 years old when the spaceship, I think it's called Challenger, in '87, when that exploded. I was 6 or 7. I was 6, because I'm young. And I didn't have that reaction for that. Like, and maybe because I was just young and I didn't know any better or anything. I remember getting sent home from the day, but it didn't touch me. So this was like one of the first major, like, things of this nature to happen in my lifetime. Um, and so, yeah, I was glued to the TV for what seemed like a month, because that was the coverage for the longest, like just everything related to the airplanes. And so it was scary. Eric, I lived in Detroit at the same time you did. There was a lot of things that we couldn't do, and there was a lot of fear of like, can we go out? Should I? At the time, I didn't have a car, so I was taking two buses to work. Like, should I get on the bus? Like all these things. And for the listeners, Detroit, the Metro Detroit area is very diverse. There's a very large Middle Eastern population in Metro Detroit. If you live there, you've grown up with people from the Middle East, from Israel, from um, Poland. There's a large Polish population. There's just a lot of populations there. And so when that happened, I knew like, oh man, this is going to affect like my Middle Eastern friends or Middle Eastern coworkers or whatever. So that was just sort of like my thoughts during the moment. And obviously some more things happened after that. Patrick, you had something to share?
Yeah, and you talked about it a little bit. You talked about how it hit home a little bit, and it was for me too, because for me, wars and violence and terror attacks were always something that was taught to me as a part of history. Like wars are fought far away in far away lands. You know what I mean? It was never something that felt real to me. World War II, World War I, whenever we learned about it in school, it felt like history. It wasn't real, and I can distinctly remember on that day saying to myself, holy shit, this is going to be history. Like one day I'm going to be reading about this day, like this is serious business. So that was the first real connection to history or something historic that I had an experience with. It's obviously a tragic event, but it's a significant event that isn't something that I read about in history. It's something that I know where I was here. I was doing this. I was watching this. It was the first real connection to history or anything historic for me. So it was really kind of hit home. It's just kind of what I wanted to add.
Before I pivot over to Prince, so Patrick, you were a school teacher. Did you ever teach kids old enough where you had to teach about 9/11 at all?
So current events weren't really in our fourth grade curriculum. That was more of a fifth grade curriculum. Like I taught a lot of American history with Revolutionary War up towards, colonization, settling, explorers, a beginning of American history, and kind of fifth grade took over from Civil War to current events. So I never really taught September 11th, but the students that I had weren't alive, obviously, in September 11th. So it was always something that we talked about around that time, like, and they would tell me stories about where their parents were and what they were doing. So it was another distant historic event to them, as what we're going to hear from Prince over here, who I don't believe was around or who was pretty young during that time as well, is, it was real for me. It was an event that I lived through. That's in history, and I connected with it in a different way.
Excellent segue over to Prince. So Prince, you were 5 years old.
Yes.
And so
baby,
just a baby. You probably don't remember much about that day specifically, but you graduated and gone through school. How has 9/11 been taught to you over the years?
Yeah, so like you said, I was 5 years old, and I can't specifically remember the day of. I can only go off of stories that I was told. Really, I was told, like my mom told me, I was at daycare at the time, and she had to come and pick me up with the chaos of everything that was going on, and how everybody was just kind of in shock over the incidents that was going on. And so growing up, I guess years after that, it'd be hard to pinpoint the exact time that I remember it specifically being taught, but I do remember when I was younger, we would learn about 9/11. I would say almost I learned less about it in school and more about it like outside of school, if you will, because on 9/11, and I feel like it happens less nowadays, but on 9/11, there would always be shows that would come on. There would always be like, 30 for 30s, or I forgot what the term they would use for them. And they would explain everything that happened on that day and the tragic events. And, of course, movies came out about it. So to be honest, I feel like I learned more outside of school about 9/11 than I did in school. I don't know if maybe it was such a touchy topic that they didn't want to dive too deep into it to teach about in schools.
That's a shame. That's
yeah.
a shame.
But to be honest, I know we went over it. I know we talked about it, but I know for a fact I learned more outside of school about 9/11 than I definitely did in school. And that makes me think too, nowadays, like you said, I was 5 when it happened. So anybody born after me, they, like you said, they weren't even alive for it to happen. And I feel like it gets talked about less and less each year, if you will. Like we still remember it. It's still 9/11, but the impact of it is almost, it's like it lessens each year that goes by, if you will. That's just how I feel.
Right. Eric, I do want to come back to you because you had kids that were older than 5, right?
Yeah.
At that time. So as a parent, when that happened, like what were the conversations you were having with your kids in the subsequent weeks, months, or whatever?
Well, like you pointed out, Detroit has a large ethnicity, diverse background. Uh, Samia and Sean did have a lot of friends that were not black because of the type of schools that they went to. They had questions about, why would the foreigners, want to go ahead and want to kill so many innocent people because they have, different ideas about how society should be ran. So we had to explain to them the same way that people view African Americans as a certain type of people, that we can't just view everybody in the same vein, more or less. So it was really just explaining to them, just because you saw a different type of face that actually did all of the stuff for 9/11, that wasn't the entire representation of their race. In every race, there are rogue individuals that have thoughts that just are so far out there. It's just really explaining to your kids that these are just isolated people that have these certain beliefs, that everybody that looks like them don't behave like them. And another thing, just kind of veering a little bit away from talking to my kids about the other 2 planes, the one that hit the Pentagon and the one that was trying to hit the White House. Those 2 things do not get talked about a lot.
Like Flight 96 or Flight 98.
Yeah,
Something
yeah,
like that.
and just
You're right. You're absolutely right.
and thinking about that 9/11 was terrible, but it could have been a whole lot worse. Can you imagine a plane, blowing up the White House? Whether the president was there or not. They say the president wasn't there, but that's always like the thing that they say when something happens that the president wasn't there. What would have happened? The people in that last plane, they knew they were going to die. They knew they were going to die because they had already found out about the Twin Towers. They already found out about the plane that hit the Pentagon. They knew they were going to die. And so they don't get enough credit for the sacrifice that they made for the rest of the country, because it very easily, they could have just cowered down and be like, well, ain't too much I can do about it. I'm just going to go ahead and let these folks, blow up the White House. But those brave men and women that jumped the terrorist that was holding the plane hostage, they've got my respect, because that takes a lot of guts.
Yeah, Eric, thanks for bringing that up because Yeah, I totally missed the mark on that. When I think of 9/11, I do think of the towers, and even during this conversation, that was on my mind. And you're right. Like the other two
Great point to bring
planes,
that up.
we do not talk about nearly enough. So thank you for that.
Well,
Um,
being old has its advantages.
Shit,
yeah,
man. Are we giving Eric credit for something? I
you
mean, damn.
remember
I
something?
mean, let's.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Hey, Eric is a very, very smart person. I may make the occasional mistake accidentally on purpose, but damn it, there's a lot of stuff up here.
We love you, eat shit.
Each it. All right. The next one is for everybody. Do you know anybody personally affected by 9/11? Like whether a family member was involved or was a victim or anything like that?
I'll go first, and no, I don't. But one story that did capture my attention, uh, the wrestler, her name is Selena Vega. Her dad was in the Twin Towers when 9/11 struck, and sure, she lost her dad.
Hmm.
Really, I
And
didn't know
that,
that.
yeah, they did a documentary.
Selena
I think it
Vega.
was like, yeah, it's like 2 years ago. They did a documentary on that she lost her dad during 9/11, and so that was something that just watching her story and watching how emotional she gets, and every time she has a major accomplishment, her dad's not there to see it. Her dad was
Hmm.
always her biggest cheerleader, and she was just so emotional about losing her dad that every time that I like see her wrestle like during this time of year, you could just kind of see her just like breaking down because then all of those memories just start flooding. And I think that I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard that Michael Jackson was supposed to have been in the Twin Towers that day.
Hmm.
You might have to research that, but rumor has it that he was supposed to have been at the Twin Towers that day, but he was at a
Yeah.
party like really, really late that night. And
That
then he
sounds
was
familiar.
yeah, he
Yeah.
was he was
It does
he was
kind of
getting ready
sound
to
familiar.
go, and he was talking to his mom, and he was just saying, "Mom, I just really don't feel like doing it today." And she was like, "Well, don't, just stay home." And he stayed home. So
Jeez.
it's just like a lot of near misses. I heard people had near misses, like a couple of people were supposed to have been on one of those two
Hmm.
flights that ran into the Twin Towers, and they wind up missing their flight for one reason or another. So it's just like an amazing backstory for 9/11. It's terrible that it happened, but about the, what if I would have made it onto that plane on time? I would have been amongst the casualties. Imagine us losing Michael Jackson, to the Twin Towers, the 9/11 incident. And then there were some
Instead
other
of
famous
propofol.
people too. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, either way it goes, that was just like a really, really bad day when we lost Michael Jackson. But like Soleil said, that'd be a story for another day.
Hmm.
But it's like the major impact, New York City, the firemen and the policemen, they're running into situations where people are running away from. Even the ones that didn't die, all of that in that smoke and stuff that's like inside of their lungs and their systems, their life, their quality of life has been compromised. And like Princeton said, I don't think we talk about it enough. These men and women gave their lives to make sure that more people didn't die. And
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
just, I mean, to me, it's emotional because as an adult, I'm sitting around here and I'm thinking to myself, damn, what if that would have been, my parents that was in there or my adult kids, that's in there. And it's just, in 9/11, it's still horrific when I think about it. But no, to
Yeah.
answer your question, I'm sorry, no, I didn't know anybody personally, but those stories really, really get me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Patrick.
we had. Yeah, we had. I vaguely remember. I didn't have anybody personally that I knew, but I did remember of a story. It was something about there was a when I was teaching one of. I don't think it wasn't one of my students, but we had a student in our school that had a family member that was lost that day, and I remember her being a part of the celebration of life that we did, uh, during that. So, so I can remember a story about something with school, but nothing personally. But as a teacher, I had some a student in our school that had a family member.
Yeah, I didn't know anybody either. That was affected by either being there or have an extension of a family member. I did have a friend who was stuck in New York for like 2 weeks, who was supposed to come back home to Detroit like that day or whatever and couldn't. So, I mean, but that's nothing compared to how other people were affected. Prince, were you going to say something?
All I was going to say is that, like you guys, I don't know anybody personally, but I know one person that comes to mind is Pete Davidson, the comedian. I know that because, and the crazy thing that always comes to mind with that is because it's always like he uses it a lot in his comedy, and so I always wonder, like, I wonder if this is like a coping mechanism, like using it as like, since he did lose his father in that incident, like comedy is his way of getting over that. And because it always gets brought up pretty much in any comedy sketch that he has. So, but that's the only person that comes to mind when I think about that. I didn't know anyone personally, but
I mean, I would probably imagine that's almost a way to honor his father. You know what I mean? That's probably what I would think as, as a comedian, as being a way of, advancing your career and stuff, in a way to honor, like, I don't know, you're thinking of your father, and so as a performer, I can understand how one can use personal references within their life as part of their show. I can relate to that.
Yeah, I could see that. I just personally, I feel like that'd be tough. That'd be tough for me to have to.
Oh yeah,
think
100%.
about that all the time and relive that. But I guess that
100%.
If you can use it as a positive, if you will, to further
motivation,
your career, why not?
Or just to continue to mention his name, things like that. You know what I mean? Just our importance to keep his memory relevant in a lot of ways. I think, it obviously takes a lot of strength to be able to do that on his part. But
yeah, 100%.
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Pat, real quick, you were in the Buffalo area when 9/11 happened. Were you still staying like up north? So, what was the vibe around Buffalo? Being it's like reasonably close to New York when you think about a plane, running up the side of a building.
Reasonably close. We're 8 hours from New York City.
By driving, not by plane.
I think there was a national grounding of all airplanes immediately, I believe. So no airplanes were in the air once I think that happened. I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I don't know that my geographic location played into it any more than me being anywhere else. I always think of September 11th with being the significantly terrible day that it was, but I always relate it to my broken wrist because I should have been in school. I wasn't in school. I was a senior in high school. You know what I mean? Like, so it's just crazy to me that that's how I put the two together. I always think of them together.
You're just a badass skipping teenager.
Yo, that's right. That's right. I had like 2 choruses that day, a theater class and a study hall.
Oh,
my senior year was awesome. Oh, peer counseling was in there too. I was a peer counselor. Say no to drugs. Drugs are bad.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Feel bad for those kids.
You guys forget that I, at one point in my career, was a positive influence on today's youth. Can you believe that?
Well, you are what you're doing.
That's thank you. I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
So our response to 9/11 has often been criticized. We invaded Iraq first. We didn't go into Afghanistan where bin Laden was, allowing him to escape to Pakistan for 10 years. There were this is something that a lot of people forget, but about a week after 9/11, there was all these anthrax envelopes being found in Congress, and people were getting sick. I think 5 people died. That was
around the same time.
Yeah, that was attributed to Iraq when it was later found out that it wasn't. So was our approach the correct one? in starting a war with Iraq and not immediately going into Afghanistan and trying to get bin Laden and the Taliban immediately?
I think
Uh, so
Prince.
I'll say quick on that. That I feel like it was almost necessary, if you will. I know it caused for years and years. We were in this war that everyone still talks about to this day and how unnecessary it was. But I feel like at the time that it happened, everyone was so riled up, so full of nationalism, if you will, that like one thing that goes back to Eric, you explaining to your kids, like even for the people that look like that, that you can't have that prejudice that they're not all like that. Well, when something like that just is fresh on your mind, it's almost impossible not to feel that way, you know, and everybody's going to be so riled up that I feel like we did what was necessary, if you will. We had to take some course of action, and that was the course of action that we went with. It was the most obvious one, and that's why we went with that.
Eric?
In hindsight, we definitely were wrong. I do agree with Princeton that from a national pride perspective, that we had to do something. Trying to think, yeah, I think that was the first like major terrorist act that it took place in New York. I'm not sure who was behind the New York City subway bombing. I don't know if you guys remember that, but that preceded obviously 9/11. Not
Was
by
it
much. So I think that
94,
yeah,
93, 94?
yeah, yeah, and I think that was
Something like that.
the first attempt of terrorism. So a lot of people have a tendency to forget about that. Um, with America being a superpower and we always are interjecting ourselves into policing, injustice, it does make you a target. There are times where I think that we should not be so hands-on upfront defending everybody because we don't have all of the details or there are ulterior motives. Now, I'm all for making sure that if somebody's country is getting invaded, and obviously they're outgunned by somebody else, then yeah, we're supposed to lend help. But I think we need to be very careful about interjecting ourselves into situations. That's how 9/11 happened. For as much stuff as we know, we probably don't know, but like what 5% of what's actually going on, the rest of that behind the scenes stuff is what kind of gets me upset, is that we found out after the fact. And then we as Americans have to be on our toes if we want to go travel abroad. We don't know what's going on. We're vacationing, having fun, and then the next thing you know, somebody grabs us and takes us hostage. So I think that our government, because it doesn't directly affect the government officials, they need to be a little more careful about how they interject, and do more fact finding. Everything is about like money and power, and I get it, but all of the things that are happening right now, I think they're the residuals from 9/11. So
Hmm.
that's my 2 cents.
Patrick?
I can't believe I'm agreeing with Eric twice in one show. But I mean, when he says that we won't really know the truth, you're absolutely right. We won't really ever know if what we did was the right course or the wrong course. When you take a look at the way that our country, I think, has tried to be the big brother of the whole world since its existence, I think that puts us into trouble sometimes. When we use words like propaganda words of weapons of mass destruction and all of these kinds of things to justify things. I mean, again, we don't really know, what the reasoning was, why we did what we did. But I think if we take the attitude of a little less trying to be the big brother of the world, I think we'd be a little bit better off.
Yeah, I agree with that. I understand why we're big brother in some
Yeah, I get it.
situations.
Yeah.
We have NATO allies, and there's
Yeah.
strategic reasons like Ukraine. There's
Yeah.
strategic reasons why we're there, or we're helping them. But like we can't save the entire world, and
Yep.
I think that stretches our resources too much.
Very much so.
last question. I just want to get y'all response to this quote. Obviously, if you're on Facebook, I know Prince isn't, or he's not on there often. A lot of people
Old
are
book.
a lot of people are posting tributes and thoughts and things like that. And this one touched me the most because I really haven't thought much about how life has changed since then. But I want to read the quote and get y'all response to it. 23 years since 9/11. As I get older, I feel the grief of that day deep down in my bones. For years, I was so focused on how we recovered that I didn't recognize the permanence of what we lost: innocence, naivete, unfettered resilience, peace. So much was stolen that day, never to be returned, at least not in this lifetime. What do y'all think about that? Like, what our lives have changed, and immediately what I think about the biggest thing is like TSA and flying and security checks and things like that. We lived in a world before where there wasn't much of that, but how else has did this event like affect our lives?
I'll go ahead. I
Prince?
think you see it obviously, like you said, TSA is the big one. And now when I get on a plane, I have to make sure that my body wash can fit in a bottle that's about this big. Because we all know, I guess that's what the bombs are made up of. But I think it goes to other events too. It's not just like when you get on a plane, but any sporting event that you go to, any large event, there's so many more checks now I mean, for me personally, this is how I grew up. This is all I've really ever known, is having the very strict rules, if you will, and having large gatherings, making sure that everything is checked. So I think it's just, it's obviously not a positive, but it's made it where we're more strict on when you go into places and public events, that if in a way it's safer now. And that's a good thing, at least. So for a lot of these events.
Yeah. Eric, you were going to go next?
Yeah, a couple of things I wanted to say. One, Soleil, I don't know if you were old enough to remember when you could just simply just go to Canada with your ID or your license.
Yep.
So it was a very friendly, very loose border. There wasn't.
Get your own ideas. My point.
Oh,
Damn it! Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I'm so sorry. Being older, being smarter, being wiser.
And older. Don't forget to say that twice.
Definitely older.
And older.
But the biggest thing about it is, I think low key, the whole immigration issue really, really was brought to the forefront after 9/11, because of the fact that there were individuals that were in our country. After that, immigration became a huge issue. So I think that the biggest effect of 9/11, outside of the loss of life, was the fact that immigration is like either one or number two in terms of what we feel that the country went wrong. How do we check for immigrants? Just because they look a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that they're not American. So it's like that was the start of the Great Divide, in my opinion. And I believe had 9/11 not happened, then the immigration issue would not be as big as it is today. Because as much people want to talk about immigration, a lot of people were from the pre 9/11 era, where everything changed after that. Because now you look sideways at somebody who doesn't appear to be American. So that's my take on it.
It's really interesting you say that, Eric, because when 9/11 happened, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or anything, like President Bush, he was our president. Everybody rallied behind him. Everybody, to the younger people who only know Rudy Giuliani as the guy who has mascara or hair color coming from his head, he was actually like a strong pillar during 9/11. He was the mayor, I think, of New York City at the time.
I think he was just on his way out. I think he had just turned out.
he was America's mayor. That was his nickname.
It was around that.
And we all like were American, and we were united in that moment. But I think you're right, Eric. Afterwards, as everything started to settle down, I do think like the divide became greater, where we do more of I forgot what the term is, but racial profiling, or just profiling based off of skin color or language, if they're speaking a different language. So great point there. Patrick, you could wrap this up.
Yeah. Again, I because everybody else stole my thunder. TSA security. I mean, again, I can remember when I was 19 years old in Buffalo. My college was 10 minutes away from Canada, so the drinking age was 19 in Canada. So we were going over an international border sometimes 2, sometimes 3 times a week. And I would be driving the drunk bus. This is a true story. I mean, I'd have underage kids, 19, 20 years old. I'd have about 6 of them in the back of my car. Now, I was sober. I never really drank during that time. But I mean, we would go to all the bars and all the clubs in Canada, get absolutely shit-faced as underage people come across an international border with nothing but our licenses. I mean, where were you? Canada. What were you doing? At a Clifton Hill. Okay, go ahead. Like, that's crazy to think about. That's the reality that was back then. Again, I agree with Eric again that I think a lot of prejudice started with that. I think a lot of news created propaganda, created a whole bunch of negativity toward racism and ethnicities. I think that did definitely add to the divide as far as profiling prejudices. I mean, I am ashamed to admit it. There was a long time when I would just see somebody of an Arab descent, that would come on an airplane, and I had to tell myself in my head, stop it. You're okay. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not proud of that, but that's something that was probably drilled into people's heads during that time, So, and you're right. They talked about people rallying behind Bush. Everybody really did, I can distinctly remember seeing he was in a classroom, wasn't he? Reading a book to a class, I believe.
Yeah.
I can remember seeing something like that, So here's the thing, okay? As a country, and we're going to talk about country now, we're terribly divided, okay? Though if we're looking for silver linings, if we're looking for something that maybe came out of September 11th, there was a lot of unity. There was a lot of coming together after that moment. And it's a shame that it takes something tragic like that to happen to bring a community of people together. I think we need to find other ways that we can build a bridge towards each other than tragedy. Yeah. Because it definitely did bring people together.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on 9/11. Patrick, I'm going to keep it with you.
Yes.
We're going to talk about the debate from last night.
Yes.
So
I was excited up until that moment.
Stop it. My first question is, what are your thoughts on the debate and who won?
Do you want my honest opinion?
Yes, please.
It was a shit show. Nobody won. We all lost. We're all dumber for having to watch what was put on national television at 9:00 in prime time. Nobody won. It's, to me, it was a parade of he said, she said, a parade of foolishness. Not even directed at one individual. It was so much, he would say up, she would say down. She would say left, he would say right. Nobody answers the question, no matter who was being asked.
But isn't every debate that way, Patrick?
Right, 100%.
Okay.
And my point about this is that, do I feel it moved the needle? Do I feel that anybody won? Absolutely not. Did any opinions change because of what I saw? I don't think so. I think they all spoke to their bases. I think they didn't change anyone's opinion. If you thought Trump was a pompous asshole jerk, you still think he's a pompous asshole jerk afterwards. If you thought Kamala Harris is full of shit and says lies up and down, you still thought that way. I don't know that it did anything to change anyone's opinion.
Okay. Eric?
I've got a slightly different opinion. Two things stood out in that particular debate. One was when President Trump was talking about in Springfield that people were eating dogs and cats. Like, really?
Yeah, they're cooking our pets or
Ohio.
eating our
Right.
pets.
Ohio.
Well, thank you. I'm like, it almost seemed like he had a Joe Biden moment, to be perfectly honest with you. Seemed like he had a senior moment. I was just befuddled. I was sitting there, I'm like, no. I'm like, did he really say that? And then he doubled down. Like, what in the world is going on here? Another moment that I just thought about was when they were having the conversation about abortion. And maybe this was just a slip of a tongue, but he was saying that you can abort a baby who's been born after 9 months. I'm just paraphrasing that.
He did say that.
He did say that. I'm like, well, Mr. President, at that point, it's murder.
Did you guys see the video that he was referencing though? I'm just curious. He was referencing the former governor or former mayor of West Virginia. And there's a video of him actually saying that once the baby is born, we put the baby aside and then decide what to do with it. Now, do I think that he meant to murder the baby? No.
No, that's what I was saying. I was just paraphrasing.
Right.
I think he got his words were mixed up.
No, those were the actual words of the former West Virginia governor. He actually did say that the baby is born, we put the baby aside and decide what to do with it. Now, what I think that he meant by saying that was, do we decide to put it in foster care, adoption? I don't think he meant murder as a choice, as in the way that Trump maybe is referencing it. That's the only thing that I can say.
Okay. And one thing that Kamala Harris said that I think that really shut down the whole guns issue was when she stated that her and her VP candidate were gun owners, that nobody's taking any guns away. That was probably one of the first times that I ever heard President Trump strongly try to come at somebody, and then it was just shot down like, hey, I'm all for carrying guns. We're not about to do anything to kill that. So I think that he lost a lot of steam shortly after that. But like Patrick, like you said, I think they pretty much stuck to their points. He did seem a little agitated though. And he just didn't seem like himself. To me, he had a bad day, in my opinion. Because even I've seen Trump agitated before, but he's also prepared. He seemed like he was caught off guard with a lot of the sharp comebacks from her. But hey, I thought it was freaking hilarious, though. I expected as much because both of those two, they know how to handle themselves when it comes to people coming at them. Her being a former prosecutor, and then Trump, always being in charge. I don't think Trump has ever had a boss, to be honest with you. I think that might be the reason why he's having such a hard time dealing with not being president, because he actually has to watch somebody else make decisions. But it was funny as hell to me, though. But those were the things that stood out for me.
Who won?
But should a debate be funny? Should a debate be funny?
It should be, and I think that I'd give a slight edge to Kamala. I believe that I'll be honest, she performed better than I thought that she would. She looked presidential. She looked firm, in control, and I was really impressed the fact that when she went over to him to go shake his hand. Because I don't think that there was going to be a handshake had she not went over there as like Kamala Harris.
It was an awkward moment. It was.
It was for him, but I think she intentionally did that though.
She did.
Yeah, for him. He wasn't. I don't think he was prepared to shake her hand. I agree with you there.
And it looked real awkward. Not that he didn't want to shake her hand, but he was sitting there going through, his papers, getting ready for the debate, and she just walked right over because it looked like she was heading to her podium first, and then she looked at him, and then she just made a beeline straight towards him. And it threw him off.
Let me say this, because there's not a lot of things I respect about Donald Trump, but one thing that I have noticed.
Wait, I want to hear this. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I've seen this over the years, but like when he meets with world leaders, he will like walk to a spot firm and like with intentionality and do the handshake with like a world leader or something like that. And so she stole that right out of his playbook. I don't know if that's what they told her to do or if they brought that up. But if you look at the video, she came all the way over to his side, basically right behind his podium. And I think that set the tone for the rest of the debate. I think he was like red after that because she stole his move. So anyway, but that is something that I have seen Trump do numerous times. It's a way for him to establish like dominance or superiority over other leaders that he's meeting. And it was just interesting to see that she did it to him. So, Prince, your thoughts on the debate and who won?
So, who won? I guess I'd give the edge to Kamala as well, but only for me because, like Patrick said,
Kamala or Kamala?
Kamala, I'm sorry. I do that all the time. That's on me. But Patrick made a good point that they both do avoid answering a lot of the questions, but I feel like Trump goes above and beyond when it comes to, like, you can't even get. There was one time also about the abortion when they were specifically asking them. They were like, "Hey, your vice president said that if the law hits your desk about abortion, like you'll pretty much veto it," I believe is what they said, and he still managed to spin that into another topic that had nothing to do with answering the question, and he was
just talking
good for that the whole time. And also he continues to and I doubt he's truthful about this, but he continues to deny knowing anything about Project 25. He says that he hasn't even read it, that he stayed away from it at all, doesn't even know that anything that's a part of it. Come on, let's be honest here. You know at least what it's made up of. So
he said, she said. That's all it is. He said, she said. Who do you believe?
Yeah, I guess there was a lot of he said, she said in there, but that's what I got out of I got out of anybody that was going into this undecided is probably still undecided. But whoever you were going to vote for, you didn't change who you were going to vote for from this debate.
All right, well, that's going to lead into my next question because I slightly disagree with that last point, but I'll just share my thoughts. I do think Kamala won, and I don't think it was close. I think it wasn't, his performance wasn't as bad as Biden. Biden was a train wreck, absolutely, but this was not a good performance by. He talked about illegal immigrant, alien, transgender operations in prison. He talked about Haitians eating dogs and cats and pets. Like it just, he said some extreme things.
We all got dumber. We all got dumber.
He said some extreme things in the past, but that was really out there. He was on some of Pat's gummies, I would think. But I do think that Kamala,
I don't do edibles.
I think she showed strength. I think you're right. Neither one of them answered all the questions fully. She definitely dodged some. I remember one specifically that they asked about regarding her values and sort of changing her stances on certain things. And she definitely avoided it, went into an entirely different direction. That's what politicians do. But overall, I think she did great. And I think, like I said, from the moment they shook hands and the way that they did it, how she did it, I think that set the tone. And he was irritated for a lot of the debate. So my next question, if both candidates came to you for one piece of advice that could give them an edge over the next 8 weeks, what will it be? Let's start with Pat.
You're going to start with me on this one?
I can start with Eric.
No, that's okay.
Or Prince.
So my advice, my goodness. First of all, I'm in no position to give advice to anybody, let alone future candidates for the presidents of the United States of America. So
but you have to. You have to.
I know, but let's just put that disclaimer out there. Okay, that, So probably my advice to Trump, and this may surprise you, talk less. Talk less. Stand on, stand on what was good when you had it. Talk less. Let you stand on your record, I guess is what I would say. The only other thing that I could say for Trump would be to reverse the threat to democracy thing. I think he's missing an opportunity when Democrats call him a threat to democracy. I think he had his strongest point at the debate when he said, many people call me the threat to democracy, but yet you're up here as a candidate, never having received one vote. So things like that, I think he needs to stick to less talk, less blubber, which I agree. He's an asshole. Okay. But that doesn't decline or deny him the ability to be a good leader. Sometimes some of the best leaders are assholes, and they have to be assholes to make those tough decisions. So talk less, use the threat to democracy backwards, because I think the process of Kamala Harris being nominated and given that position was the most anti-democratic thing that you can talk about. And then for Kamala, I would just say do more. You're currently in power. So rather than talking about what you could do, rather than talking about what you will do, go to the border. Do something now with what you have. That would be my advice. I don't know if that's fair or what, but there you are.
No, that's fair, and that's your opinion. I'll go next. For me, so for Donald, the one thing that I liked about his debate was his closing last night. To your point, Patrick, he kind of hit on the fact like, hey, you've been in power 3 years, 3.5 years. Why haven't these changes happened already? And he said it multiple times in his closing. And so that's something that she does have to answer for. And so going forward, he needs to hammer that more than some of the stories that we've already talked about. So for me, and this is why I kind of referenced Prince's response in the last question, is that for independents and moderates, I think they were swayed by Kamala. Based on what I'm about to say with my point on her. But for Donald, he's not winning anybody. He has his base, but he's not going to get anybody on his side from that independent moderate group talking about transgender alien prison camps or whatever he said. But if he talks about making some changes, 3.5 years, and doing that, I think that's going to get independents to say, hey, you need to answer this, Vice President. So he needs to hammer that. For Kamala, she mentioned it briefly during her debate, but she says she's a new generation. And that's where she's going to meet independents at the polls. Like, she could point out the fact that Trump, Biden, they're 80 years old. Independents have already said they don't want to vote for two old white guys again. Well, she's 20 years younger. She's going to get the black vote. She's going to get women. She's all about supporting abortions and things like that, women's rights. So she needs to hammer that more, that, hey, she's a change agent. I remember some stat that since the 70s, there has always been a Clinton, a Bush, or a Biden that's been a nominee for the White House, and now she's that change that everybody wants to see. So I think that's the message she needs to get out. Patrick, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, you had a great point about how Trump needs to reach outside his base. I 100% agree with what you said. I think his comfort zone is his base, and I think the one thing that's going to help him reach outside of his base was the endorsement of Robert Kennedy. That came as a shock to me. I was surprised that he endorsed Donald Trump. To me, as somebody who is a registered Republican conservative, to me, seeing somebody that at one point was a Democrat, wanted to run as a Democrat, was not allowed to primary of an incumbent, decided to run as an independent, and then rather than going back to where he is, his whole family is, he went to the other side. To me, that says a lot, and it also, I think, will help him reach beyond his base.
Prince?
So for me, I'd say for Trump, I'd say it'd be to come up with kind of what Patrick said as far as the talking less part, but more specifically talking less about like the immigration and the raising like the tariffs on other countries. And every time, all of his speaking points and all of his talking points, they always, to me, seem to go back to what he's going to do in other countries, if you will, about how he's going to go and affect them and how he's going to, I guess, bring in all the money that they owe us was one of the points that he brought up. And of course, how the immigration is affecting African-American jobs. But I get your points on immigration. I don't need to hear those anymore. And I hear them repeatedly. So I would say have less talking points on that. We've got our fill on that, would be for him. And then for Kamala, did I say it correctly that time?
You did good, buddy.
Perfect,
You did good.
perfect. I would say for her, and unless maybe she did and I missed this part, but going over her further on points like Trump brought up, if you will, a good point on how Biden came up with his plans on giving student loans back and how, unfortunately, that wasn't able to happen, and how he came back again with another plan and that didn't happen either. So going over specifically more ideas on how she will get her plans into action and how they will actually come to fruition, if you will, and going specifically over that. And that would be my two pieces of advice.
Cool. Eric?
So just to kind of go back to what Patrick said, and am agreeing with Patrick. She was a senator.
Yeah, buddy.
Woo! She is the current vice president. So her level of influence has been great over the last, say, 10 years. Why hasn't certain things been done? If these are issues now, you're the vice president. You've got the president's ear. You don't have enough cachet where you can say, hey, President Biden, these are the issues that are important to me. I would really like for us to address these. So she's had the opportunity to do it. At one point, no, I'm sorry, they didn't have control of the Senate. They had a narrow majority in the House with Nancy Pelosi. So there has been opportunities for her to go through and push the legislation through on these exact points. Outside of the whole Roe versus Wade thing, Trump made the last couple of appointments to the Supreme Court to swing that. Okay, not really much you can do there until some other appointments can be made in the Supreme Court. But as far as like the immigration and all of that other stuff, she definitely has had her opportunity to do that. So she needs to tell us, okay, what are your plans for these issues that you say that you're going to take care of if you become president? And why haven't you? Because you've had the opportunity. As far as Donald Trump, when I listened to his speech shortly after the assassination attempt at the Republican National Convention, that Donald Trump could have swayed individuals to vote for him. Mm-hmm. The humility that he exuded.
You're not wrong.
I'm telling you, it was like, damn, this is the Donald Trump that I could get behind. Yeah, this is the Donald Trump that I could get behind. He had an opportunity, if he would have talked less and just kind of let that speech resonate, he would have gotten himself the swing votes easy. But because he went back a week later to the bashing, type individual, I was like, man, I'm like, I the fact that people got, killed during that assassination attempt, it was horrible. But that was his opportunity in that window with that type of speech that he had the country eating out the palm of his hands. he was getting the sympathetic vote. Hell, even had me thinking like, well, damn, well, man, maybe I am being too hard and too critical on him. After listening to that speech, he humanized himself. And I don't know if his campaign team told him this or not, but I'm sure they saw it. I'm sure they saw it.
Mm-hmm.
The posters right after that speech, right after the convention, he had like what a 8 or 9 point lead increase after that. Missed opportunity. But that's the
CNN
guy.
was even saying nice things about him after that.
Yeah. But it seems like it's been so long ago since that happened, and it's only been like what 9 weeks.
Yeah.
And I think he totally dropped the ball there. But those are my 2 points. I just thought that he nailed it. He nailed it. And then he took his foot off the gas.
Well, we'll have more political talk in October, I'm sure. I will say that I think the endorsement of Taylor Swift is bigger than the endorsement of RFK. Just saying. Let's move on. Let's move on. Our final topic. Our final topic is the Tyreek Hill video from Sunday. If you've been living under a rock and haven't seen it, Tyreek Hill, wide receiver, Miami Dolphins, gets pulled over on his way to the game Sunday, first game of the season. The police rips him out of the car, throws him down. It's a big deal, but I want to get y'all thoughts on the video that y'all saw. Let's start. Eric, you were the last one. Let's go start with you.
I only saw bits and pieces. You could piece together enough of those videos. Somewhere would be the truth. Here's the thing about that. Tyreek Hill does have a mouth on him. I'm not justifying the police snatching anybody out of a car. However, knowing Tyreek Hill's reputation, that might have had a little something to do with it in terms of his mouth. From what I understand, the police officer that snatched him out wasn't aware who he was at the time that he pulled him out. Oh,
they knew
was
who
aware?
He was.
They knew who he was?
They said it in the.
They said it in the video.
Mm-hmm.
Did they? Okay. I think that his mouth has something to do with it, to be honest with you. Like, I don't condone snatching folks out. Definitely don't condone people's knees going in the back of people's neck or in their shoulder blades because of the whole George Floyd incident. I think that should be the last thing that anybody should do as a police officer, especially when you're dealing with a certain demographic. But he definitely was mistreated. But if Tyree was running his mouth like he typically does, I'm not condoning it, but I can understand why it happened because it might have been initiated. Now, the police are supposed to be the adult in the room, so to speak. They're supposed to be, trained on de-escalation and how to handle certain situations. It was handled wrongly, but I think that it might have been instigated just a little bit by Tyreek in his mouth.
Prince, your thoughts on the video?
So I saw the body cam footage, and a good amount of it. I can't remember how long it was, but I saw the video. And my dad has taught me, especially being a black male, that if you're pulled over, you want to make the police officer's job as easy as possible, pretty much. You don't want to do anything that can jeopardize yourself, that'll make them even think about pulling out a weapon or doing anything crazy. You want to make it as easy as possible. And from my thoughts on watching the video, Tyreek did not make it as easy as possible at first. There were times when the police officer first came to the car, he has very tinted windows that you cannot see inside. And so when the police officer was asking for him to roll down his windows, the police officer coming from their point of view, you don't know who's inside that car. You don't know if the person has a gun, if there's someone else in the passenger seat that might have a weapon. You do not know. So when Tyreek Hill refused to even do something like that, now all of a sudden you're just asking for more to happen. Then when they ask him to get out the car, and at first he refuses to get out the car. He does say he is eventually, but at first he refuses to get out the car. You're just egging the situation on. You're making it worse for yourself. Now, I will say the police officer, he handled it terribly. He got so aggressive so quickly. Yes, was he not listening to everything you were saying? No, he wasn't. But that doesn't mean you then start grabbing them. You're aggressive. You just start dropping curse words, and you don't do stuff when you want to do it. You do stuff when I say to do it. Pretty much, it was way too aggressive. One of the YouTube comments basically said like, "Hey, this wasn't police. This was a Cuban motorcycle gang," and that's what it felt like. It didn't feel like how the police should handle a situation. Like there was no reason to be that aggressive. It shouldn't change it. But they did know it was Tyreek Hill. It said one of the officers said, "Hey, that's Tyreek Hill." It shouldn't change it. You should treat them like an ordinary person. But at the same time, knowing that's Tyreek Hill, dude's not going to pull out a gun on you. He's a millionaire. He's not going to jeopardize his livelihood. So nothing too crazy is going to happen. And then after that, they were even egging on. I forgot the guy that was with him, his name, but they were even getting on that. I think he ended up getting arrested too, or at least handcuffs put on him. And he was just
Calais Campbell.
Yeah. He was just trying to help Tyreek out, and he was trying to make a phone call to help out Tyreek. And the officer was like, "Hey, you got to go. It almost seemed like he was trying to shoo him away so that they had less witnesses, if you will. He was trying to get rid of him. And then the guy was just backing up like, "Yeah, I got you. I'm leaving now. I'm leaving now." And he's like, "No, it's too late. It's too late now." So it was just, did Tyreek Hill put himself in the best situation? No, he didn't. But the officer didn't handle it well at all. And I feel like as an officer who's, the climate of the population and how it's been lately, I would just think in the back of my mind, hey, how can I de-escalate this without it jumping to where it's going to be all over TV? That's just what I would think. But I don't know. I guess they don't think that way.
Patrick?
So, as I think Soleil, because I think you responded to that question. So I did try a social experiment on online, and I thought it went pretty well. I tried to raise this topic, which I know is divisive, and people are going to be on both sides. And I tried to foster a good conversation, and I feel like the people that responded had multitude of different opinions, and I think that I took all of it in, so I'm thankful for that post, and I'm thankful for the ability that there's still some sanity amongst people when we talk about issues that can be divisive. First of all, if you want to play the blame game, all right, let's play the blame game. There's blame to go around everywhere in this situation. Are there things to look at everywhere in this situation that everybody could have, should have, would have done differently, and if it was happening again? Again, there's not much that I disagree with what's already been said at the panel. It's obvious that Tyreek Hill has a history. We all know that history. You try to separate that history and look at these incidences in a vacuum, and try to look at it as objectively as you can. But it's difficult when you see somebody and know somebody of a history of Tyreek Hill not being the most upstanding human being, if you will. But here's my point. It's not illegal to be a douchebag. Okay. And basically can I say douchebag on this podcast? Can I do that?
You've already said it twice.
I've said it twice now. So, the point being is, did Tyreek help himself? Absolutely not. When the cop knocked on his window, all he was doing was mocking the police officer by saying, "Don't tap on my window. Don't tap on my window. Don't tap on my window." That's just him being a douche. Is it necessary? No. Is it illegal? No. Did he provide the officer everything that he needed to do his job? Under the assumption that he already had his license, which it looked like it had, and he had it in his hand, when Tyreek Hill rolled up the window and said, "Whatever, man, do what you got to do." Is Tyreek a douchebag? Yes. Is he, what happened to him following that warranted based on his douchebaggery? No. Is it illegal to be an asshole? No. Should the cop have just done what he had to do, like Tyreek suggested? Yes. Is our police officers trained in de-escalation situations? They should be. There was definitely an opportunity when Tyreek Hill rolled that window up. That police officer made a choice at that moment. The choice that he made was to continue to tap on that window for no other reason than to make his dominance felt. He didn't need that window to be rolled down anymore. He had everything that he needed to have. He could have just, again, did what Tyreek suggested. Do what you got to do. I got to go. All right, go back to your police car, write him the citation, and be on the way, and none of this happens. So everything after that moment to see, and I believe the police officer that was originally tapping on the window wasn't even the one that pulled him out of the vehicle. I believe it was a second officer that actually was like, all right, there's enough of this, and literally grabbed him by his neck, if you look at it, and forcibly put him to the ground. That's not even the worst part. I have more of a problem with what happened when he was standing next to the curb and he was, they're saying sit down, and you hear Tyreek saying, I just had knee surgery, and not a second and a half later, he wasn't even provided a second and a half to sit down in handcuffs. Listen, I'm a fat ass. If somebody ties my hands behind my back, I can't sit on a curb in a half a second, okay, let alone somebody that has had knee surgery. He wasn't provided an opportunity to follow directions. They say, oh, you didn't follow directions. You didn't do what you were told. No, you didn't do it quickly enough to your satisfaction. That's what I had a problem with. The chokehold to bring him down to the curb. Are you out of your mind? What are you thinking, dude? I mean, it's Tyreek Hill at this moment. You're going to be on blast. Are you a dumbass? Like, not only that, but where is the protect and serve here? Who are you protecting and serving at that exact moment? So those are all points that I struggle with. Then we talk about Calais Campbell. We talk about Jonnu Smith. I'm sorry, I'm long-winded. You talk about Calais Campbell, you talk about Jonnu Smith. I get it. It's the police officer's job to secure the scenes. But if you look at both of those guys, both of them had their hands up. Neither of them, in my opinion, ever took an offensive or aggressive word, stance, movement in any direction of those officers. And in fact, multiple times when the one officer went up to Calais Campbell, you can visibly see him. And by the way, Calais Campbell is a Walter Payton Man of the Year winner award, okay, which is the highest NFL honor for the most outstanding, upstanding citizens in the NFL. Okay, so he's known as a high class kind of guy. The video, you see him constantly walking back every time. Leave. Okay, I'm leaving. As he continues to walk back. How he ends up in handcuffs, I have absolutely no idea. So, is Tyreek a douchebag? Yes. Did he deserve to be treated the way he was? No. That was ridiculous. It's not illegal to be an asshole.
All right. Thank you for that. Let me go, Eric. I got another question. Hold that thought, because I am going to come to you. So I'm on TikTok a lot. I scroll all day, and the part of TikTok that I'm on is like cop chases, car chases, and traffic stops and stuff like that. So I watch this stuff all day. I have a high level of respect for cops. I've seen more patience with, like, in all these videos, they pull somebody over, people calling them names and insulting their mothers, their their kids, doing all types of stuff. And the cops have so much patience in those situations. And in this situation, there was no patience. Yes, he was a douchebag. He's in a little sports car. You can't just hop out like an SUV. Like, if you've ever been in a sports car, they're hard to get out of. I think they were just
low to the ground,
very low to the ground. They were very unreasonable in that situation, lacked patience, and yeah, he was probably fucking with them, trying to get them mad or whatever, and it went wrong. It could have been worse. Anyway, go ahead, Eric.
It was a clash of two people with big egos. That's what the problem was. The police officer had an ego. Tyreek Hill had an ego. So it was about basically whose dick is bigger, who's going to piss further. You get situations like that. You, as a police officer, I know that it's a dangerous job, and I know that they cited officer safety for the reason why they had Tyreek in handcuffs. Okay. So at a point where Tyreek is secured, and you have other officers that are around you with guns, thank goodness they weren't drawn, but at what point it has your ego been served that you've got this man in handcuffs? Now you're going to go ahead, you forcibly snatch him out of the car, you handcuff him, and then he's forcibly taken to the ground. That's ego. We cannot have police officers with that type of ego where they feel because somebody is mouthing off to them that they have to assert some sort of dominance. I don't understand it. I really don't understand it. That situation, had that not been Tyreek Hill, let's just say that was somebody else that was cut from a different cloth. That situation could have went south very, very fast. But the ego is what I don't understand. That's the common denominator with these officers. It's the ego. And 95% of them do a tremendous job keeping their egos in check. It's the United States. You got a First Amendment right to express yourself. Cussing out a cop's not illegal. Expressing how you don't like how the officer is treating you is not illegal. It's the people with the damn egos that are making this just so tough to deal with.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much all I have to say about that. I'm sorry, I just had to get that off my chest.
Sure. Prince?
All right. Well, Gungo, this was a great episode. Really enjoyed it. I feel like we got to a lot of topics. So just going to talk about what we're going to have next week. One of the things you brought up way, way earlier, Patrick, was how when you're on a plane, there's been times you've been on a plane if you actually have had to tell yourself, like, hey, just because someone looks a certain type of way, don't think a certain thing or don't feel a certain type of way. Well, next week, our episode is actually on unconscious bias. And I think it's something that affects a lot of us in a lot of different ways and on a lot of different topics. So that'll be a good one. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that and talking about that more with you guys. So that's for next week. And also, I'd like to add here our social media platforms. Follow us. We're on Facebook, Instagram. Hit us up on all of those. So I believe that is
you hitting the right buttons.
Yeah,
Look at you hitting the right
yeah,
buttons,
look at
bringing
me,
up the
huh?
screen and
Hey,
doing all that.
feel
Let's
like I
give
did a pretty good job.
Junior a round of applause.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
He's
well
done a
done,
great
buddy.
$5.
Welcome to an adult.
We can fire James now. He doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, without good idea, he might not be back. No,
Yeah, he might not be
No,
back.
I'm looking forward to having him here to run all this next week.
Yeah.
But I believe this is on to your spitballing next.
Nope.
Oh no.
Nope,
Actually,
it's-
look, I was 95%. I was doing
Oh,
great.
He gave you a compliment and then you
Oh,
fucked it
I
up.
was doing great. It's
Almost
actually so late.
Man, you were
Look
right there, dude. You were
Look,
right
honestly,
there.
the picks were so off last week that no, I'm just kidding.
You're not. Actually, I finished 2-1 last week, didn't I?
Okay.
I mean, it's a winning
so
record.
last week I had Texas on the road versus Michigan, 7-point spread. They won that. Chicago won 4.5 against Tennessee, and I did lose. I had Atlanta. Where was it? Atlanta -3. I did lose that one to Pittsburgh. Anyway, so my picks for this week, let's see here. I have, Ball State versus Miami. The over is 54.5. I'm going over on that one. Ball State can score. Miami can score. They should have 55 points by halftime. I'm taking UNLV, my home team here in Nevada, about 5 miles away from me. UNLV on the road against Kansas Jayhawks, +7. Their offense has been amazing so far this year, so I think they can hang with Kansas. And then I have the LA Chargers -6.5 against Carolina. They better not lose that game. They better win by 10 or 14 points. So those are my picks this week. Ball State, Miami over 54.5, UNLV +7, and the Chargers -6.5. And now on to PP.
Nah, really?
Or I'm
Really?
sorry, to Pat.
Really?
That's
Yo,
my-
you know something? I really need a haircut. Can you not make it a big screen, dude? I don't like my head's already big enough. I got
Make it
like, I'm
bigger.
looking
We
at
got
you.
to. I would try
All
to.
right.
invite you. The best I can do is this one.
maybe- little bit too much chest hair for all right, guys, listen, I don't know why they decided to give me this opportunity to bitch about something. I mean, I tend to do that enough during the show. So all right, so let's talk about a type of person. Okay, let's talk about a type of person that has a sense of power, a sense of I'm a tough guy. Let's talk about keyboard warriors. Do we know what keyboard warriors are, guys? Okay, so first of all, these are the worst kind of people. These are the people that also that you meet at a club, that also after a night of drinking, they have beer muscles, that they think that they're a lot tougher than they are, but they're really hiding behind their friend that's tough, that they're kind of like, yeah, look at you. Yeah, what are you going to do? And there's really got a tough guy in front of them. It's the same thing with these keyboard warriors. All right. Listen, I am an admin of a Facebook group. Okay. I'm not going to toot my own horn, but it's pretty popular. I'm kind of a big deal. All right. So I'm an admin on Facebook, and the messages that I get from these keyboard warriors that act tough. I literally got a message last month that said that, and I'm quoting it here, you should have died in high school. Are you serious? First of all, if you're sending me a message for an admin of a Facebook group, first of all, I live in a retirement community. So probably that person that sent that to me is about 67 years old. And that's on the young side. All right. These keyboard warriors think that they have so much power. All right. Well, here's my message to keyboard warriors. All right. The next person that decides to flex their muscles online with me, or that think that they can act tough, I'm going to tell you what. All right. I'm going to ask you to do things that we used to settle when I was a kid. Meet me at the flagpole, 3 p.m., because it's about to go down, dude. Keyboard warriors, you're done. I'm done too.
Good job.
That
Good
was
job.
great, Patrick.
Right?
You tell those senior citizens you tell them off.
God, that's a real message. Somebody said I should die in high school.
That's great.
I'm not
Did
even
you
kidding.
I got a message a couple weeks ago, and I sent it in the chat where I was being called the F word,
Dude,
derogatory term for
meet me
people.
at a flagpole, not you,
Yeah.
Soleil. 3 p.m.
Yeah.
Meet me at a flagpole.
That
Let's
person,
do it.
come meet me in Vegas, and
Come on. We'll throw
get you
down.
down. I'll scratch your eyes out for saying all
On
those bad
that
things
note,
about me.
Hey, you have to tell them that the Detroit women are the craziest.
We are.
There it is. Well,
We
I
are.
think I'll close this out, and I'll try and do my best here. But you've heard it. It's been from our mouths to your ears. Take it easy, everybody.
See you next week, James. Maybe.